Well, we're going to wrap up this series called The Beautiful Tension. Christmas is coming on, but we're going to hold on one more week, and we're going to look at an important part of the Christmas story. Hopefully you enjoyed your Christmas, giving presents, getting presents. Hopefully you only had to take a few back the last couple of days. Maybe you spent time with family that you were excited to spend time with. Maybe you spent time with family that was a little more difficult, you haven't seen for a while, or there's that tension that comes every year, every holiday when you see them, and you experience that this week. Maybe some of you are glad it's over, some of you can't believe it's already over. But here's what I know is through this we talked about that there's all kinds of tension that stirs as we look at the holidays. And for 4 weeks we said, look, when Jesus comes, Jesus stirs this tension also. That Jesus doesn't come and live this life and everyone's like, oh, that's great, whatever Jesus says. But honestly, Jesus would say things that would bother people. The people would no longer follow Jesus because of what he said. There was this tension that would build. And we spent several weeks looking at that. And my goal has been, and my goal for all of us always, is sometimes when there's this tension, that we wouldn't avoid it. That we wouldn't run from it. That's going to be brought up a lot, hopefully, in this reset series. There's going to be some things that need to change. We can either avoid it and act like it's not there, or we can push into it. And so my hope is that as we've looked at this, that we'll push into it the tension that Jesus brings, what he causes. And so today we're going to look at this tension of fear. This tension of fear. And then we'll push into that tension. Now, I'm not talking about phobias. I'm not talking about the fear of heights, which I have. I'm not talking about the fear of spiders or snakes. I'm not talking even about that one moment when you were afraid. I remember when I was dating Heather, my wife, for about 6 months, and her family invited me on vacation to Destin, Florida. And so I went with her family to Destin, Florida, and around that time there were a lot of shark attacks that were happening down around that area. And her family decided to rent Sea-Doos. And so I'm like, all right, that's great. I'm excited. I'm not afraid of sharks, but my soon-to-be wife was petrified of sharks. And so we get on the Sea-Doos, and she says, no, go fast, no, go fast. That's too fast, that's too fast. And so the whole time I was always going too fast. And so we never really get to experience these Sea-Doos. We had this open ocean, and the whole time Heather keeps hitting me, go slower, go slower. And since I wanted to make her like me, I went slower. If this was now, I'd be like, no, it's okay, and I'd go fast, because she's stuck with me. But I went slower, because I knew she was afraid, but I just felt like this whole time we were missing out on something. I think there's a lot of things that happen when we become afraid. I'm talking about big afraid. The big fears that come up in our lives. I want to look at those this morning. And I want to look at something that happens in the Bible when someone should have been afraid, maybe was afraid, and what that response looks like. We're going to look at the story of Mary finding out she's going to have Jesus. If you don't own a Bible, we'd love to give you one. There should be one around you. I didn't get the page number, I don't think, this morning, but if you want to read along with us, it'll be page 1013. 1013. We're just going to go through this and stop as we read. We're going to stop pretty quickly. Verse 26. Luke 1:26. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee. Now I want to stop just for a second, and I want to talk about Nazareth. Now, Nazareth would have been that town that everyone was like, there's nothing good in Nazareth. Nazareth would have been that town that you think of, you're like, it's the back hills, it's the nothing good comes from there. It's kind of a slow town, everyone just kind of grows up and lives and no one moves away. I grew up in Oklahoma, so I can think of a lot of those towns. Maybe you have those. This would have been Nazareth. It would have been an insignificant community. Agriculture, some say less than 500 people lived in Nazareth. Now what's interesting is God decides to enter the world, and he enters the world as a baby. And he decides to do it in this kind of forgotten town of Nazareth. Now I don't know if you know this, but we're at what's called a Nazarene church. And we're connected to Nazarene churches around the world. And when it got started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the founder said, we want to be called Nazarenes. And one of those reasons is because of this. That when Jesus enters the scene, he enters kind of into a lower class community. He enters into a forgotten community. And those who formed our denomination, the Nazarene denomination, said, that's the people we're going to serve. That's the people we're going to love. Those are the ones we're going to reach out to. Let's be called Nazarenes. So when we read the Bible, there can be moments where we just kind of buzz through that and not pay much attention. But man, this holds a ton of significance for the story. That Jesus comes, and he comes into a community that is insignificant and doesn't seem to matter. I mean, why not show up in Jerusalem? Why not show up in a king's home? We've looked at this a lot through this series. He often comes to the people who need him most, the ones who are forgotten. And he comes in the very beginning into this town of Nazareth. Let's go on. Verse 27. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and the angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God." Now let's look at this for a moment. This angel appears to Mary, and it's probably not the kind of angel you would think of. It's not the chubby, naked little baby on a cloud kind of angel. Right? The angels in the Bible would have been these warriors, these massive creatures. And so this one shows up, and Mary is afraid, obviously. And this word here of being afraid, of having this fear, would have been this idea that she was paralyzed. It wasn't just a little bit of fear. It wasn't just like my wife's fear of sharks, but she would have been paralyzed with fear. Now, one of those reasons could have been just the sight of an angel. In the presence of an angel, maybe that's it. These were the angels that the scriptures say would battle the enemies of God's people. Those angels. The angels that we know defeat the enemy, Satan. Those angels. This is who shows up to Mary. But it's interesting to me as we look at that it's not necessarily that Mary is terrified because of them showing up, but it looks like she's afraid of because of what they might say. She's wondering what this angel is there for, and what's this angel going to do to her. She's fearful because of the demand that may be asked of her. This is going to be a major interruption in the life of Mary. And she knows it. And I think that might be why she is afraid. Have you ever felt like God was telling you to do something? You ever felt like God was telling you to say something, to change something, and in your mind you think, this is going to be inconvenient. This isn't going to be easy, and so oftentimes we'll just move on. Some of you maybe are here today and you say, no, I don't follow Jesus, but you may too. God may have been stirring you at some point and you didn't even know it. To help someone, to encourage someone, and you heard that still small voice and you kind of pushed it aside because of how inconvenient it might be. Some of you maybe felt like you're going one way in life, and then all of a sudden God kind of throws you a curveball and you feel like, oh, I'm going to have to go a different direction now. It was inconvenient. It was uncomfortable, and maybe you were fearful of it. I think what we're really fearful is the unknown. I think this is what Mary's thinking. I don't know what's going to happen. It's unknown, and I am afraid. Mary had a plan, and that was to marry Joseph, start a family, and live their life together. And this angel appears and interrupts those plans. These plans are going to be severely, majorly inconvenient. Man, I remember my life. I'm sure you've had those moments where something's happened and it's been inconvenient. I was a junior in college, and some of you know my story a little bit, but I was a junior in college. I was wrapping up college, going to be a PE teacher. I was going to coach football. Life was going to be good. I found Heather. I knew I was going to marry. And that's what I thought. I had my plans together. In the spring semester, I was here at Trinity. And my wife grew up here, and we were down on that end of the building, and we were meeting with a small group of college students. And the youth pastor at the time gave us a spiritual inventory test. I had never done one before. I hadn't grown up in the church. I was really just kind of a new Christian, and I had my life together. And I fill out this inventory, and it ends up saying pastoral. And I was like, what? Pastoral? No. Is there a teacher? Yeah, I'm supposed to be a teacher. I must have done this wrong. And so I see that it's pastoral, and I kind of play it off, and I tell Heather later, she goes, well, I can see you being a pastor. And I'll never forget this moment. I was so mad at her. I I think that may have caused one of our first little disagreements in our relationship. I was mad. And the reason I was mad is because I had everything figured out. I knew what life was going to look like. But then this happens. And so I leave here, I leave Trinity, we go back to school in Kansas City, and I went to a private university, Christian college, we had chapel. And chapel that week, God comes and speaks. And again, I just feel like, man, this guy is speaking right to me. Again, I kind of become angry. I know this is inconvenient. This isn't going to be easy. This isn't going to be comfortable. No, I'm not so, I don't know what a pastor does. They grew up in church, I don't know what to do, and the biggest of all of them is I couldn't speak in public. I was petrified to stand in front of people. Terrified. So much so I would become sick to be in front of people. And so when I thought I'd be a pastor and to speak in front of people, like, God, you're funny. But not me. Don't interrupt my plans. And I became mad, and honestly, I was afraid. And Mary was afraid in this moment. What does this mean? And the angel knows and says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I love that because it kind of reminds me of my son who's afraid of the dark, and me saying, don't be afraid of the dark. It doesn't really help. He's still afraid of the dark. And so I wonder if Mary in these moments, she hears the angel say, no, don't be afraid. Fear not. But I wonder if Mary was still scared, because I know I was. I knew what I was supposed to do. I changed my major and added a full year of school. I had to get 72 credits in 2 years. It was 18 hours. I got married. I played football. I had a job. It wasn't convenient. It wasn't convenient. But I knew that that's what God wanted me to do. And the thing that happens here with this angel and with Mary is Mary hears the angel say, look, God's found favor in you. His grace is on you. He has this wonderful plan for you. But in the back of Mary's mind, I'm sure she said, no, I have this 5-year plan. I know what my life is going to look like. Joseph and I are pledged to be married. We know exactly what house we're going to buy. It's got a little land. We're going to have 2.5 kids. We're going to have a few goats. No. This is going to ruin it all. That this is going to ruin everything, whatever you are going to tell me. Life is going to look different. But let me encourage you. What if it was different? But what if it was better? What if it was better? What if whatever God was calling you to, whatever God was pushing you towards, what if it not only was going to be different, but what if it was going to be better? And I look back at what my life could have been like. And I think life would have been okay, but then I look at where God's brought me and what God's done. And all because I was willing to say yes and to push through the tension of being afraid. It may be inconvenient for a while. But here's this myth I think we think about Jesus. If you don't know much about Jesus, here's this myth I think that some of us believe. I think we think that following Jesus means that we're going to be happy. That Jesus just wants us to be happy. God just cares about our happiness. And I'm sorry, but that's not really true. God's ultimate goal is not to make you happy. His ultimate goal is to make you more holy or to be more like Jesus. And so we get that confused sometimes. And so if you believe that, then you're believing this false gospel. What Jesus never came to do is just to make sure that you're happy. You can read that through all these characters in the Bible. Oftentimes when they follow God, bad things happen first. But God always sees them through it, and it always is better. And so I know for a lot of you, there's been these moments where you felt God telling you to do something, and you said yes, and it hasn't been convenient. Several of you who are fostering little kids, talk to me. I know your situations. It hasn't been convenient. But it's worth it. The fears that you had, it's worth it. So some of you, other families, maybe you've had something stirring and you felt like, man, maybe I'm supposed to foster. The only thing that's been keeping you from it is the fears that you have. Maybe it's to adopt, and you're afraid of what that would look like. To adopt a little baby. Maybe it's going back to school. Maybe you never went to school and you feel like God is saying, go back to school and the thing that I've called you to forever, and you didn't follow my direction at some point. What if you went back to school? That's scary. What if it's a change in job? You've done something forever and you're not passionate about it. You've always thought, this is what I'm supposed to do. Now let me say this, don't just quit your job. Make sure there's a plan B. But if God's calling you to do something different, what if you did it even if you were afraid? Well, what if there was this fear? What if it was to volunteer? What if it was, first of all, to volunteer here? There's lots of places where you can volunteer here at Trinity. One of those places with our kids. It may not be convenient. You'd miss Sunday mornings sometimes. I would encourage you to think about that, to pray about it. We have a bunch of little kids that meet upstairs. We have a bunch of babies and preschoolers, babies that need to be held and loved, and it helps a parent be able to come here. What if you said, look, I haven't done it because I've been afraid. What if I can't do it? Push through that. What if it was just about your time? You said, I don't really want to give my time to that. Do it. We're going to start an after-school program at Coldwater. We're going to read with little kids. Statistics show that if a kid's not reading at his grade level by third grade, the percentage of his graduating is way down. Third grade. They then say that if they don't graduate from high school, that incarceration rates go way up. It's not okay with me. It shouldn't be okay with us. We partner with Coldwater, we do a lot of stuff over there, and we want to make a difference. And so I have 50 kids right now who need to be tutored. I have 50 kids right now who are waiting for someone to say, hey, I'll give an hour, a little over an hour on Tuesday and Thursday to read with little kids. Might be inconvenient. Might be difficult. You might have to rearrange some things in your life. You might be afraid and thinking, I can't teach a little kid to read. No, you can. But push through the tension, push through the fear. Talk to me about what that would look like. Tuesday, Thursday, 6-week sessions that you read with a little kid. I promise you, it'll be worth it. Even though it's inconvenient, it might have to change your schedule. It'll be worth it. But what if it was committing to your marriage again? Well, what if things haven't been going well? What if things have been difficult and you said, look, this isn't going to be convenient. We're going to have to date each other again. We're going to have to go to counseling. We're going to have to be together and learn what this looks like again. It may be inconvenient. You may be afraid. You may think, I don't know if it'll ever be the same. Push through it. Push into it. And believe that it can. I keep saying this because I come from a family of divorce. I care so much about marriages. We're going to do a 5-week series starting in February about marriage. Make a commitment to be here. If you're not married, be committed to be here to help all your relationships, but maybe you know someone you can help. Bring someone with you. But push into it. Don't be afraid just because it's going to be inconvenient. Maybe dad specifically, you need to figure out what it would look like to work less and spend more time with your kids. You felt that on you. You felt the tension of, I need to make money and provide for my family, but I need to be there for my kids. Maybe you need to rearrange some things. It's not going to be convenient, but it's worth it. Don't be afraid to push through it. And then ultimately, the tension might be, and the fear you might have is actually following Jesus. Some of you maybe have been coming around this place for a long time. Maybe you grew up in church, but at no point did you ever really say, look, I want to follow the ways of Jesus. And I want to believe in Jesus for my forgiveness, and I want to follow him. And maybe you've been afraid of what that will look like. Maybe you're afraid of what people will say. Maybe you're afraid of what people will think about you. It may not be convenient. It may not be comfortable. But what if you push through that too? And you begin to say, look, I want to follow Jesus in his ways. It's worth it. Why? Let's jump back to the story with Mary. Verse 31. You will be with child and give birth to a son. And you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end. Now here's the news that Mary is hearing. It's interesting because oftentimes in the Christmas story, those who are told this news, every one of them is afraid. Joseph's going to hear this news about Mary, and the angel's going to say, fear not, do not be afraid. The shepherds hear this news, and the response is, don't be afraid. Mary hears this news, or the angels that appear to her, don't be afraid. God's favor is on you, Mary. And here's the news. God is going to enter our world, and he's using you, Mary. The Son of the Most High is coming into our world through you. And here's the deal. Mary would have been a good Jewish girl. Mary would have known that her people were waiting for the one who would come and rescue and redeem and make everything right. And so now Mary's hearing that she's going to play a role in all of this. This is why it's worth it. And so you would think Mary would be ecstatic. She'd be excited, but her response is often our response when we feel like God is calling us to do something. Verse 34, her response is how? How will this be? How is this going to happen? Mary asked the angel, since I'm a virgin. How in the world could God ever make this happen? How in the world could God ever save my marriage? How in the world could God ever help me change my occupation? How in the world could God ever help me forgive the people who have hurt me? How? I don't see it as possible. Well, what's Joseph going to say? Talk about tension. Mary's got to go back to the guy that she's going to marry and say, hey, I got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is I'm pregnant. That wouldn't be good news for Joseph, and it wouldn't be good news either for Mary, because during this time, it actually could be a death sentence for Mary. For Mary to be pregnant and not married to Joseph means that she had committed adultery. We see that Jesus encounters a woman caught in adultery, and she's going to be stoned. So Mary hears this news. She's afraid. She's got to go tell Joseph. She's like, that's the bad news, but the good news is I have the Son of the Most High in me. And it's funny because in Joseph's account, it almost feels like Joseph's like, okay, I believe you. But look, I because I'm faithful to the Jewish law, because I care for you, I'll just step away quietly so nothing happens to you. But Joseph also has an angel come to him and says, don't be afraid, it's true. But there's this tension that comes up, and the tension often comes with the how. How, God? How could this really be what my life could look like? Well, here's the first thing that I hope you caught is sometimes it's inconvenient. Sometimes the interruptions in our lives are inconvenient. But a lot of times God's purpose is way different than your plans. God's purpose for your life is way different than your plans. Don't be afraid of what's going to look like. Don't be afraid of the inconvenience. Don't be afraid of God's purpose for you. But live into it and press into the fears. It's worth it. And Mary wants to know how. How could this ever happen? Verse 35. It says, the angel answered, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she who is said to be barren is in her 6th month. For nothing is impossible with God. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, maybe you're not really a church person, and this part of the Christmas story is really difficult to believe. I understand that. I do. I understand. But here's the truth in this, and what I believe, is it does seem impossible. It does seem impossible, and the angel says, look, nothing is impossible. Now, this doesn't mean that you can just say whatever you want. I remember growing up, I wanted to play any professional sport I possibly could, and then I stopped rowing in 8th grade, and so I knew the NBA was out. I never got much bigger, so I knew the NFL was out. And so it's not just that whatever you want is going to happen. What this means is whatever God says will happen, will happen. That's what it means. That if God promises, if God calls, he'll make it happen. So what you see as impossible, Mary, is not impossible. So whatever you feel like God is saying to you, whatever you feel like maybe God is saying to start, or to change, or a place that's broken that needs healing, you may think, no, that's impossible. I promise, I know what this is like. I know what it's like to be called to do something you feel so unequipped to do. There's no way I can be a pastor. There's no way I can stand and speak. But what God has called me to makes possible. And so for you, whatever you're afraid of, whatever you feel like you're supposed to do, and you always come up with the how and the what ifs. Isn't that true about fears? We always think the worst is going to happen. We always play the what if game. But what if we stop and believe that the impossible could be possible because God is saying that it can happen? Now, one of the questions, and I talk to a lot of people about this, is how do I know if God is speaking to me? Like, I've never heard this audible voice telling me to do something. That would make things much easier, but that's not always how it happens. So how do we know? Just 3 quick things that I've heard is we test it. I think there's 3 ways that you can test it. Is you test it with someone who knows you. Test it with someone who loves you, who cares for you. What if you went to him and said, look, this is what I feel like God is saying. Do you see that in me? Could you affirm that in me? Do you see that happening in my life? And if the person who knows you says, man, I don't know, let me pray about it, I don't know if I see that, then you've tested it. Maybe it's not true. The second thing is you test it to what God says. So let me say this. If you're wrestling with this thought of can your marriage really work, test it to the Bible. If you're wondering if your relationship with your kids that's been broken could be healed, test it with the Bible. You'll see that those things can be true. And then the last thing oftentimes is just to test it with a step. It's to move in that direction that I've seen many times in my life where God is closing doors and opening doors. And you just start testing it. But here's what you don't do, is you don't just settle. Some of you are just going through life just with the status quo. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, you do the chores, you eat dinner, you go to bed, and you do it all again. And a lot of us, we just settle. My son, his favorite is 4, and his favorite restaurant is McDonald's. And I'm not sure why, because we don't eat McDonald's much. We hate McDonald's. It's my secret that I eat McDonald's every once in a while, but I don't share that with many people. But my son loves McDonald's. It's the place he always wants to go. And so, no, we're going to go to a nice dinner. We're going to go somewhere good to eat. Think Ruth Chris. Not that I've ever been to Ruth Chris, but think Ruth Chris. Good steak. It wouldn't matter for my son. My son would say McDonald's. It's like he doesn't know better. He doesn't know any different, and he loves the toy. But he settles. He settles, and so my son is settling for McDonald's when he can eat something much healthier and better. Some of you are just settling for McDonald's when there's something better for you. There's something better, and you've been back and you haven't stepped into what God has called you to because you're afraid. Because you're playing the what if game and you don't think that you really could do it. God may be interrupting you, but it's not convenient. And it definitely might not be comfortable. But his purpose for you is often different than the plans you have for yourself. Now here's what I love about this story, and I think this is why we can do what Mary's doing here. How does Mary finally respond? Verse 38. This is her response. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May it be to me as you have said. Then the angel left her. Now, I totally believe that the enemy of God wants you to live a life of fear. I totally believe that he doesn't want you to take those steps of faith he's calling you to do. He wants you to live in the status quo. He doesn't want you to pursue what God wants for you. And it keeps us from experiencing what God wants for us. Now, some people would say that fear is an absence of faith. I think fear is just putting faith in the wrong things. It's not that you have an absence of faith, you just have put complete faith in yourself. Where you put your faith in situations, where you put your faith in people. And you haven't put your faith in the one who is calling you to whatever he's called you to. And again, for some of you who maybe is new to this, it's calling you to follow him, and you think there's no way. You think you have an idea of what it means to follow Jesus. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's you, come talk to me afterwards, email me, let's have a cup of coffee. Let's talk about what it means to follow Jesus. But here's what I know is true. Is in this moment, Mary is not concerned with who she is, but whose she is. Her response is, I am the Lord's servant. That's who she is the Lord's servant. One of our core values is that we'll find our identity in God alone. That we'll work to find who we are and who God says that we are. Not in our own ability, not in our failures, not in our past, not in our mistakes, but we'll really begin to see ourselves like God sees us. And so for this moment in Mary's fear, she says, look, I don't know how this is going to happen. This is not going to be convenient. This could even be deadly for me. But you know what? I belong to God. I'm a servant of his. And she makes this comment. May it be. What you said is going to happen, let it happen to me. And she's moved from fear to complete trust. But what would it take for you in the midst of your fear of the unknown for you to begin to trust and say, look, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to take those steps of faith and I'm going to trust in the one who is calling me to do it. I am the Lord's servant. May it happen. Everything you said, let it be with me. Because here's the deal. The important thing for all of us is not the outcome. In those moments where I felt God calling me to be a pastor, I remember when I finally said yes. I remember going down and there are these things up front that are called altars, and a lot of times they're places where you pray. And I remember this moment where I was like, all right, this is it. God, I've been running from it. I've been afraid. I'm going to take this moment and I'm going to say yes. And I walked down. I basically had this moment where I said, all right, God, I've wanted to give you my life. It's yours. Let it be. And I remember someone coming up to me and saying, look, all those things you're afraid of, God will take care of. Because God is responsible for the outcome. I'm responsible to be obedient. So you be obedient and you trust in the outcome that's going to happen because God is going to be involved in it. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. But push through the fear that you have. Don't be afraid. And trust in God. Let's pray. God, thanks for this morning. Thanks for how in the past I've seen this happen for me, that you've rearranged things in my life. It wasn't convenient, but you've used those moments to shape me, to literally put me on this stage today. God, thank you even as I'm going through my own things now and decisions that have to be made and those things I'm afraid of. And when I feel you're calling me and my family and this church too, and the fear creeps in and the unknown, Lord, would you help me to remember who I am and whose I am. I pray for my friends here, God, who know they're being called to something. They're being challenged, but they're just being comfortable, and they're afraid of the things that are inconvenient. If you encourage them today to test it, to talk to someone, to pursue you more, and to take some of those steps of faith. God, we're going to trust you in the outcome and being obedient. Thanks, God, for using us, challenging us, and not allowing us to live a life of status quo. God, you do great things in us individually and as a church. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Hope to see you next week as we start this reset series. Love you guys.